We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Michael Lucci. He is the Vice President of Policy for the Illinois Policy Institute. And Mike, we've had conversations about the Chicago teachers and just about the problems, the financial problems that so many school districts around the state are having. Chicago perhaps being the most pronounced, with billion-dollar budget deficit and a junk-rated credit rating. So kind of the decreasing ability to borrow to paper over these structural financial problems. And we have the prospect of another Chicago teacher strike. That would be the second in 5 years, effectively. I penned a piece in the Chicago Tribune this week, that ran this week, which was excellent, as I'm sure you'll agree. And essentially what I suggested is, well, it's not perfectly analogous to Reagan and the air traffic controllers in 1981, because under federal law, they did not have the right to strike in the case of the air traffic controllers, where the teachers certainly do per their collective bargaining agreement. But it is in this sense, as we've seen strikes throughout the state over the last several months, Prospect Heights Grammar School District, East St. Louis High School District, McHenry County High School District. At some point, when it's clear, and it's clear now, frankly, that the math doesn't work, that you cannot continue to confer the salaries and benefits to teachers that have been conferred, given the financial wherewithal of these districts, at some point, don't you have to say, look, we respect the job you do, and we love to keep the great teachers that we have, because a great teacher is truly like a great artist. And a lot of teachers educate generations of kids, generations of families. And so they're woven into the tapestry of the communities they serve. Understand that all. But at some point, there is a price point. And if you don't want to work for what we can offer you, then like any other profession, we're going to have to try and find somebody who will.
And not only is there a price point, not only are there teachers who would be willing to work at a number of different price points, but what we have is outcomes from the system that have no decent relationship to financial resources that are poured into the system, and specifically financial resources that end up with the teachers. So of the top 10 largest school districts in the United States, Chicago's teachers are paid the best of all of them for lifetime earnings. And what are the results that are coming out of this school system? I've worked in several neighborhoods on education projects where we would have 8th, 9th grade students who would do 1st and 2nd grade math, and that would be their limit. Meanwhile, their teachers are probably doing pretty well. I know for a fact that their teachers were doing very well. And so when you have rewards being unrelated to results, you end up with a system like this where the CPS is literally quite close to bankruptcy, junk-rated bonds, terrible student outcomes, best paid teachers out of large districts in the country, and they're about to go on strike because they're going to say, we want more. The going on strike here would have no bearance on the reality of the outcomes that the school system's producing. And so there's a big problem where you have people who could just walk off the job that's not being done well anyways in a general sense. And meanwhile, you have good teachers who are being caught up in the mess because they're just going the way that the union pulls them.
You know, it's interesting. I had, in response to my column, I had this like little Twitter war with a Chicago public school teacher, and she, kind of cried poor and, oh yes, we're so greedy, and she's being sarcastic and argumentative and engaged in sophistry and not adult argumentation. But let's set that aside for a second. She uses like, yeah, I'm the greedy teacher who has to pay for my own copy paper. I looked her up online. $86,000 a year is what she makes. That's before you include the pension and health care benefits. She's essentially conceding my point without knowing it. The system. How can a system, with the resources it has, paying teachers that much money, how is it that the teacher has to go out and pay copy paper? Here's what it seems to me so many of these teachers in these districts don't understand. It is people like us that are having a conversation about system change, about rethinking how you do K through 12 education so that we can abide the promises that we make to teachers financially, as well as the promises we made to the families of the children in the charge of these school districts. We're on your side. You're not. You're essentially taking the position that the system doesn't work. It doesn't produce what it promises to produce. I concede the point. I just want to get mine and get out.
Right. And I would have students, and I taught in the evenings, I taught privately. I would have students who wouldn't have their books when their classes started. So how do you have that situation where students don't have their books, they don't have materials, they would have to wait or they would have to borrow a book so that I could then teach them out of it because they weren't necessarily learning it in the school. The resources are not going towards classroom education. A lot of the resources being tied up in administration and in bureaucracy and in a general system that's just not working for these students. So I think that the lead issue is, what are the outcomes? And if the outcomes aren't there, then you have to change the system.
Well, right. And the funny thing is, it's not like we don't have models that we could scale in Chicago. I played in this charity poker tournament for Urban Prep Academy, charter school, not selective enrollment, lottery. African-American men, African-American young men, that's who they educate. Tim King, who's the founder of Urban Prep Academy, and a liberal, by the way, he says at the poker tournament before we all got started to raise money for the school is, we get kids who come into ninth grade at fourth and fifth grade reading level from CPS grammar schools. And for 6 years in a row, every Urban Prep Academy graduate is going on to college. So Urban Prep Academy is doing something. Not only are they doing something incredible, making sure every kid is getting on to college, but they're doing something incredible, taking kids coming into Urban Prep with fourth and fifth grade reading levels, catching them up, and then preparing them for post-secondary education, post-secondary coursework. Maybe we should not model or tolerate the K through 12, the K through 8 systems, schools that these kids are coming from, and we should look at what Urban Prep is doing and replicate it.
Right. I think that would be a very good place to start. And speaking from my experience, when we would have students come in with limited resources, our mission would be, you have 4 months to take this kid from second grade math to ninth grade math.
Yeah.
And that's what we would have to do. And that was a very normal instance that we would have to accomplish. I was working in the South Side in a tutoring academy down there. So we would have students who come in, limited resources, but they knew that the system had failed them. So either it was mom or dad or grandma said, you know what, we're going to save some money. We're going to do this essentially intellectual surgery to get you caught up. We're going to pour resources into this for 4 months because the system has not worked for my kid. Now, when I would look around the neighborhood where I'd work, I knew that the kids that we were able to serve, whose family would put together some money to be able to pay for this, was an extreme minority of the overall population of that neighborhood. The rest of the neighborhood, 95% of the neighborhood, just could not take advantage of this option because they didn't have the resources. And so they were stuck where they had one option, which was the school that they were placed in. They have to stay there no matter what it does or doesn't do for them. They just stay in that system. They have no way to opt out of that system. Meanwhile, you do have models in Chicago that work, but they're not being scaled.
So the key here is it's not teachers versus administrators versus parents versus policymakers. It is system. It's not a constituency or a stakeholder group within the system. It's the entire system. That's the conversation we need to have.